and welcome to this segment of Beer to Whiskey. In my ongoing mission to spread the gospel of good taste, I find myself today in High, Texas. And anybody who sips bourbon with any enthusiasm probably realizes and knows already that High is the home of the Garrison Brothers Distillery. And we're lucky today to have Dan Garrison, who obviously by his name is the big honcho here, to talk to us a little bit about the distillery and his bourbon. So welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Russ. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell me a little bit how the distillery got started. What sent you on this path?
Sure. I was working in technology in Austin, Texas, and lost my job at the tender age of 40 years old, right in the middle of my midlife crisis. And I had to kind of reinvent myself. I was completely out of work. I had a wife, 2 kids in junior high school, and my wife really liked shoes, and I couldn't pay for them anymore, so I had to find something to do with myself. I eventually convinced a lot of my friends to invest in this business and my family to invest in it, and they let me get started down this crazy path that nobody had ever really done before. Nobody knew if it would work. I didn't know if it would work, but today I'm looking at you, and I'm got a bottle of my bourbon behind us, so that feels pretty good.
Has High been your home? Has this always been your home? Is that why we're here?
No, I've been coming out here. I live in Austin with my family, and been coming out here to visit the Stonewall Peach Parade and Rodeo since probably for maybe 12, 13 years, since my kids were real little. They used to do the mutton busting competition.
Yeah.
And, grab the tail off the back of the calf. And we've always loved this area. The melting pot of Texas is right here in the hill country between Fredericksburg, San Antonio, and Austin. It's where everybody comes home to. I mean, some of our busiest days here at the distillery are holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas, because everybody's coming home to see family.
Yeah.
So it always feels like family here.
Wow. And I know right now we're in the middle of bottling, and you do something very unique where that's concerned. What's that all about?
So just 600 yards that way, there's 25 crazy volunteers who come from all over the country, all over the world really, to help us bottle bourbon whiskey. We started it on a whim. Back in 2010 was when we bottled our first 600 bottles, and I had 3 employees at the time, myself and 2 other guys, and between the 3 of us we worked 24 hours a day running the stills and filling barrels and running the stills and filling barrels and cooking mash and running the stills and filling barrels. And we realized, shit, we got to get some bottles out the door. We got to start selling some of this stuff, or we're going to go bankrupt. We're spending so much money on the inventory, creating the inventory, that we're not going to make it unless we start selling some. So we called a friend of ours in Stonewall, and she put the line out that we were offering free barbecue and free beer to anybody that came up to help out with bottling. And we had so damn much fun that we decided that we'd continue to do it. And sure enough, today, every single bottle of Garrison Brothers that goes out the door is waxed and sealed and signed by me or a volunteer before it goes out. We number each bottle.
Oh, is that right?
Number each bottle on the side, and it's got my signature on the back before it leaves the distillery.
Oh, so that's really your signature?
It is, yeah, for sure.
Wow, that's
it's like sending my babies off into the world.
Sure.
Go forth and conquer.
Sure.
Do well.
So what kind of volume are we talking about?
What we're bottling now is the largest release in the history of Garrison Brothers. This will go on sale Texas Independence Day, March 2nd, at liquor stores all across Texas and all across the country. We're actually in 26 states today and 6 foreign countries. And we are going to do roughly 60,750 milliliter bottles this year for our small batch bourbon whiskey. That doesn't even count our single barrel bourbon whiskey, our Cowboy Bourbon, or our experimental collection, which is Balmorhea and Estacado, which have not even hit stores yet.
Tell me a little bit. I know really you kind of tell the story of every bottle of bourbon on the bottle. You tell where the corn comes from and all that. What prompted that?
So there's a lot of bullshit that goes on in this industry.
Right.
In distilled spirits in general, there's a lot of marketing brands and there's a lot of real brands. When I'm talking about a real brand, I'm talking about something like Blanton's, which is very conscientiously made by hand, 1 bottle at a time at Buffalo Trace Distillery.
Right.
And you can go there and you can see the people working on this. And that's real, that's authentic, and that's what we've wanted to be since day one. And I felt the best way to convey our authenticity, the best way to convince consumers that this was real, is to tell them everything about the bottle. What kind of corn was used in it, when that corn was harvested, where the farms are when it was grown, when it was distilled and put into a barrel, and then when the release date was, so that the consumer knows this bottle's got a little story behind it.
Right.
And it's real. It's got a legacy, if you will, and it came from here. Didn't come from some mass producer in Indiana or Kentucky.
What was the bourbon that kind of captured your attention? What was it?
Early on?
Yeah, what was that first bourbon?
Okay, I got to admit, I grew up like everybody else. I drank Jack Daniels and all the way through college. But in college, I started experimenting with some new things. Elijah Craig. I loved Blanton's, and then Maker's Mark came along. I was crazy about Maker's Mark. And through the Blanton's and the Maker's Mark experience, I learned about myself that I was preferential to wheated bourbons that are made from corn, wheat, and barley, as opposed to rye-based whiskeys. Never been a fan of rye whiskey. It has a pungent, tart, spicy character to it that I've never really liked. I've liked the Pappy Van Winkle before Pappy Van Winkle was cool.
Right. When you could buy it for $40 a bottle.
Yeah, you could in Kentucky, for damn sure you could.
Oh, yeah.
So I went back to Kentucky almost 36 times while I started collecting between 2003 and 2010. I was in Kentucky all the time. And back then you could get these rare bottlings, these unique bottlings that were really made from the original distillery that made it, as opposed to somebody trying to replicate an old recipe. So I fell in love with the Pappies and the George T. Staggs that were made by Buffalo Trace. They do a fantastic job.
Yeah, they sure do. So if you're someplace and you want a bourbon and you can't find yours?
Blanton's.
Blanton's is
I'm going to Blanton's if I can't find mine.
Okay.
Please start selling mine if anybody's listening. But Blanton's is definitely my go-to bourbon if I can find that. Unfortunately, Blanton's has become so popular, partially because probably me bragging on it. It's become so popular, it's hard to find nowadays.
Yeah, it is. They run short of it. I'm out of South Carolina, which fortunately gets Garrison Brothers. But yeah, Blanton's is tough. That's a tough one.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's good when you can.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me about these. Tell me first. Tell me a little bit about Cowboy Bourbon. I know
Sure.
that's one that's tough to get.
Yeah.
When you're talking tough to get bourbons.
So I know viewers can't see it, but in the corner of the barn, right back there in the corner, that one little rick, that one little shelf over there, is one of the places where we store our bourbon barrels. And those barrels sat there for a very long time. I never felt that they were that great. And this was in 2013 when we launched our first Cowboy Bourbon. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do with those barrels because they weren't matching the flavor characteristics of all the other barrels that I was getting. Most of them were experimental barrels.
Yeah.
They had been multi-bored, or they'd been honeycombed on the inside, or they were a number 2 char, number 3 char instead of a number 4 char, or they were toasted in unique increments, or they were made from a special kind of wood. So I never figured out what I was going to do with those. And then one day I said, you know what, I'm just going to mix them all together and see what happens. And I did. And it was rich, and it was dark, and it had this syrupy texture to it. And because of all the different types of wood that went into it, and all the different grain recipes that went into it, it had this depth of character that I'd never experienced before. Even in a George T. Stagg, which was 142 proof when I was drinking it back 7 years ago, even in Stagg, there wasn't that rich layer after layer of flavor. And I said, I'm going to bottle this stuff at whatever it comes out of the barrel. It came out of the barrel at 142 proof, and we sold 600 bottles of it. That's all those little tiny barrels yielded back then. But they were sensational, and they were 3, 4, 5-year-old barrels. And it struck a chord with bourbon enthusiasts all over the world, especially a guy named Jim Murray, who publishes a book called The Whiskey Bible.
Right.
And he gave it a 96 score, which is one of the highest scores he's ever given any bourbon whiskey. And that kind of blew us away. When my wife gave me a copy of the Whiskey Bible for Christmas, I just cried and cried because I knew we'd finally reach the people we wanted to reach with our bourbon, and they really appreciated it. It's become a collector's item ever since. We released about 5,000 bottles in 2015. We released another 5,000 bottles in 2017, and we'll release our next Cowboy Bourbon sometime this fall, probably in October.
And the other two, the experimental ones that you mentioned, tell me a little bit about those.
These are fun. I've got a guy who works for me who I taught to distill, who is fantastic. His name is Donis Todd, and he came up here. He's a great story. He came up here out of work, basically. He worked in the Army, building Army aircraft, rebuilding and maintaining Army aircraft. And he was out of work, but his son lives here in the Stonewall area, and he wanted to be close to his son. And the guy, he literally just camped out on my property and worked for me every single day. And I said, look, I can't pay you. And he said, well, figure something out. I'm not leaving. And today, he runs the whole operation. He's one of the most respected young distillers in America.
Yeah.
And could not be more proud of Donis and more happy with Donis. So Donis has been experimenting right and left. Whenever Donis says, hey, I want to spend X thousand on this, I go, do it. And he does it. And 5 years later, we find out what that experiment was and how good it is. And the latest one he's done is called Balmoret. That will be launched. It's already for sale at our gift shop here at the distillery. It is double oaked. It's aged in one barrel for 2 years, and that barrel comes from a cooperage up in Minnesota called the Barrel Mill. And then we take that liquid out of that barrel after 2 years, and he's setting it in a stainless steel tank and just agitating it to stir it up and let a lot of the oxygen in to let it breathe.
Right.
And then he takes all that bourbon that's breathing and enhanced, and he puts it back into another new white American oak barrel from a cooperage in Louisville, Kentucky, called Kelvin Cooperage. And then so it's basically about a 5-year-old bourbon.
Right.
It's been in a barrel for 4 of those 5 years, but 2 different barrels, so it's double oaked, and it's double dosed in the sweet flavors that you get from the wood, like the vanilla, the caramel, the butterscotch, the licorice, and his Balmorhea, I think, is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. The color alone is enough to win a gold medal or double gold medal at the San Francisco Wine and Spirits competition. Whereas this has a brown, sunset, orange tint to it. It's crimson, and it's beautiful, and it just looks like liquid bourbon candy.
Wow. Sounds wonderful. I'm going to have to hit the gift shop on my way out.
Please do. The state of Texas and their majesty will allow you to buy 2 bottles from us every 30 days.
Outstanding. So this is your Texas bourbon, and I think you mentioned it was your small batch.
Correct.
So
this was a small batch. This was 292 barrels that were married together to create this particular flavor profile. Donis and I tasted every single barrel that was used when it reached its 3-year-old birthday, and we decided whether we were going to let it age a little longer or whether we were going to go ahead and bottle it up. And so it was 292 barrels married together to create this individual small batch. Salud.
Tex and Miss Lily.
I think that's pretty good.
I concur.
Thank you.
I would have to agree with you. That is really nice. In my opinion, anybody who has a bourbon liquor cabinet or bourbon in their liquor cabinet that doesn't have at least 1 bottle of Garrison Brothers, you don't have a really good collection. That's just and I'm not blowing sunshine up your skirt. I mean, I'm a big fan. I'm a huge fan. So
we drink all we can and sell the rest.
Exactly. All good things must come to an end. I really appreciate your time and spending a few minutes with us. And
Russ, it's my great pleasure. Come back soon. We'll drink some more. We'll try some new things.
Exactly. And at that, see you next time.
Salud.